We're in Naples for the 11th edition of Med Dialogues, the annual conference organized by ISPI and the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs to discuss the key challenges shaping the Mediterranean and the Middle East. And we are with Mr. Gregg Carlstrom, Middle East correspondent for the Economist. Thank you, Greg, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start from the most recent developments in the region. Phase one of Trump's plan for Gaza is now complete, sort of complete. But uncertainty looms over the next steps. In particular, which strategy you think Hamas is going to adopt now? Will they just hand over their weapons and try a kind of rebranding, going full political to have a role in the future?
I'm skeptical that they're going to agree to simply hand over their weapons. I think first, if you look at what's been happening in Gaza over the past few days since the ceasefire was agreed and took effect, we're seeing Hamas already trying to reassert authority in the territory. It has been clashing with, in some cases, militias aligned with Israel, but in other cases, with influential families in Gaza that might be able to challenge its rule. It's given everyone else an ultimatum to hand over their weapons. It wants to position itself as being the only armed force in Gaza. So practically, we're not seeing signs of disarmament. And I think ideologically, it's very hard for Hamas to agree to disarm. It's founded on the idea of being an armed resistance movement. If it gives up its weapons, what is Hamas at that point? It sort of loses its whole identity. It opens the door perhaps for some of its members to defect and join other groups. So again, I'm skeptical that they would agree to it. I think maybe in the long run, other countries, particularly Arab countries, particularly Gulf countries, might try and use the issue of reconstruction as leverage to try and pressure Hamas to disarm, essentially telling it, if you don't agree to hand over at least some of your weapons, aid is not going to flow for reconstruction. And that might be a powerful pressure point in the long run, but we're not there yet. What we're seeing is Hamas very stubbornly trying to reassert its control.
Yeah. Anyways, Hamas may go, but whatever replaces it will be shaped anyway by the past 2 years. And this applies to Israel too. So what is, in your opinion, the legacy of these 2 years of war and destruction for both sides?
I think for both sides, that is something that they are going to be debating amongst themselves for years to come. I mean, I think for Israel, to some extent, the legacy of the last 2 years will depend on what do you want to focus on? Do you want to focus on what preceded October 7th and then October 7th itself? Do you want to focus on the subsequent outcomes, particularly of the wars in Lebanon and Iran? Prime Minister Netanyahu in recent weeks has really been trying to emphasize the latter. Of course, he doesn't want to talk about October 7th and the enormous security failure that happened on his watch. He wants to talk about killing Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon. He wants to talk about convincing America to join him in striking Iran's nuclear facilities. He wants that to be the focus. But I think there are a lot of Israelis who simply can't separate the two halves of this. And I think when the election comes next year, whenever it comes, it's meant to be in October. It could happen sooner, but whenever that Israeli election comes, it's going to be fought on that question of what is the legacy of October 7th and the wars that followed it. And then I think for Palestinians, there's a very similar question. I mean, it's hard to say in a quantitative way how people in Gaza feel about about Hamas over the past 2 years. You can't really do accurate polling in Gaza. But just anecdotally, I know from speaking to people in Gaza, there's tremendous anger at Hamas for dragging Gaza into this absolutely devastating war. But what will that mean politically if there's no alternative put forth to Hamas? It may not amount to much.
Trump's gamble on Middle East stability also depends on other issues, 2 at least. Lebanon, where a fragile truce has been in place for a year and where Hezbollah is expected to withdraw, at least from the south. And post-Assad Syria, which is seeking a sort of modus vivendi, coexistence with Israel. What is the Trump administration strategy in these 2 scenarios?
It really depends on who you're talking to in the Trump administration. I mean, one thing that I have tried to get across to interlocutors in Lebanon over the past 9 months is that there's not really one Trump administration when it comes to policy in the Levant. You have someone like Tom Barak, who is the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, who has also become sort of Trump's roving envoy in the Levant. who takes, I think, a somewhat conciliatory stance, particularly when it comes to Ahmed al-Sharah's government in Syria. He's been very supportive of the new government. He's spent a lot of his own political capital in Washington encouraging the US to take a sort of welcoming, moderate stance to the new Syrian government. And he's done something similar to that in Lebanon. Then you have more hawkish people in the administration, someone like Morgan Ortagus, who used to be the deputy Middle East envoy, who left that position over the summer, but seems to have now come back into the fold in a more unofficial role. Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, people who are very skeptical of Ahmed Sharah, who are very skeptical of Hezbollah's status in Lebanon and of the Lebanese government's promises to disarm Hezbollah. What we've seen so far, at least in recent months, is that the Barak approach seems to have won out, convincing Trump to lift sanctions on Syria, to remove the Caesar Act, which is now working its way through Congress, to give the Lebanese government a chance to try and do something to disarm Hezbollah. But all of that could change on a dime. And I don't think Trump himself has deeply held views about what should happen in either of those two countries. So I think it comes down to almost a struggle between his advisors, and which one is up, which one is down. That dictates the course of American policy.
I would like to go deeper about post-Assad Syria. What country is it becoming? Is a country that is out the Iranian axis of resistance. It wants to create a kind of coexistence with Israel. It has big and good ties with Turkey and Gulf states. And as we speak, President Ahmad al-Shara is visiting Russia, which was the main sponsor and supporter of the former regime. What kind of country is coming out of the civil war, along and the devastating civil war?
It's really been striking to watch the difference between Ahmed al-Shara abroad and Ahmed al-Shara at home over the past 9 months or so. I think he has done a laudable job on the world stage at building relations with world leaders, at trying to bring Syria out of its long international isolation. Not just the fact that he seems to have a bit of a rapport with Trump and persuaded Trump to to lift sanctions on Syria, but what he's done with Arab states, the ties he's built with the Saudis, with the Qataris, even countries like the United Arab Emirates, which were a bit skeptical of him at first because of his Islamist roots, are giving him a chance and have a decent relationship with him. He's done a very good job as a diplomat. Then you look at what's happening inside of Syria, and the picture isn't so positive, right? You've had two large massacres of minority groups, first the Alawites and then the Druze over the summer. You have complaints from people in the Syrian business community about the way the economy is being handled, about the extent to which people close to Shara or people from Idlib, people who were part of the business elite in Idlib over the years, are sort of monopolizing the Syrian economy. You have complaints about how the political system is being organized, a lack of representation, a lack of input, the fact that decision-making is really concentrated in a handful of advisors around the president, including some of his brothers who are influential advisors. The situation inside of Syria, not as encouraging as the one outside. Now, to some extent, you can say, could it have been any other way? I mean, there was no chance that the Assad regime was going to fall, and sort of overnight you would have a revived economy and a thriving democracy in Syria. The transition was always going to take time, but I think on some of these points, particularly around the government's inability to rein in extremists who populate the security services and the interior and defense ministries, and the way decision-making is being handled, I think there's some cause for concern about what lies ahead.
And there's also another big issue, which is the integration, inclusion of the Kurdish-led SDF, which control a large part of the country as an autonomous administration. From a strategic perspective, looking at the broader picture, we can say that after 2 years of war, Iran has been weakened by this war. Its axis of resistance has been weakened in Lebanon. Assad in Syria is no more. Hamas is in dire straits, and so on. Maybe only the Houthis are in the same situation as they were before the war. How will Tehran respond to this?
For now, I don't know if it will respond. What's been remarkable, I think, about Iranian policy since October 7th is how passive and reactive it has been. Going back to October 7th itself, I mean, by all accounts, it did not know about Hamas's plans beforehand. It wasn't briefed on them. It didn't know how to react to them. I know that point is a bit contested, but I have heard,
I do agree.
and it's one of the few things where you can get Israelis, Arabs, Iranians, Americans, they all agree on this point by and large. And so I tend to believe that it's true. And ever since we've seen Iran on the back foot, I mean, Hezbollah entering the war, but entering in a very limited way and ending up on the receiving end of a 2-month Israeli onslaught last year, you would think at some point Iran might have counseled Hezbollah to take a different tack. Either if you're going to be in the war, be in the war, or get out of it, because what you're doing, this sort of half-measured approach, is the worst of all possible worlds for you. That guidance didn't come. Earlier this year, when the Americans were trying to negotiate a nuclear deal with Iran, it wasn't clear what, if anything, Iran was willing to concede. It was sort of stuck in the mindset of the JCPOA, not recognizing that Donald Trump being back in office meant there was no going back to the old agreement, and we had to have something entirely different. And then I think since what we're all calling the 12-day war this summer, Iran has just seemed stuck. You know, they were in the remarkable position a few weeks ago of having snapback triggered at the UN, having sanctions reimposed on them at the UN, while simultaneously they're not doing any uranium enrichment because their nuclear sites were so badly damaged in the war over the summer. So they've ended up with no functioning nuclear program and sanctions. Again, worst of all possible worlds for them. And I think some of that comes down to the person of the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. I think he has always had this approach of trying to keep Iran positioned between peace and war. We're not at peace in the region. We're not at war in the region. He tried to straddle that line. The whole concept of the axis of resistance was based on this idea that he had of how Iran should position itself. That has collapsed over the past 2 years, as you said, and I don't think this elderly man who has been wedded to an idea for his entire career is capable of charting a new course for Iran. And so I think the question of what comes next, what will Iran do in this very changed region, the answer to that may have to wait for political change there. It may have to wait for a successor to emerge to Khamenei.
One last question. On the other side, we have the Abraham Accords. And it is noteworthy that no countries who came part of the Abraham Accords step out after the 7th October and these 2 years of war. What's going on now? What should we expect? An enlargement, other countries involved? Trump says that the ultimate objective is to involve Iran in the Accords. Is it possible?
It's notable not just that the Accords endured the war, but they thrived in some ways. I mean, I remember flying into Tel Aviv on reporting trips in the first months after October 7th when almost every foreign airline had suspended their flights to Israel. And you would land and you would see Israeli carriers, and then you would see Fly Dubai, and you would see Etihad, the two of the airlines in the UAE. They kept flying to Israel throughout the war, and that was a very public symbol of how deeply I think the Emirati leadership takes this relationship with Israel and how important it is to them. Will the Abraham Accords expand going forward? As you say, Trump is optimistic that they will. I'm more skeptical about that. I think the Saudis, who are the big prize in all of this right now, have been very, very clear in their public messaging that they're willing to normalize with Israel. They still are, but they have a price for it, and that price has gone up since October 7th. They want some real progress towards Palestinian statehood in exchange for normalization. This Israeli government is not going to deliver that progress. Benjamin Netanyahu has spent his entire career trying to prevent the emergence of a Palestinian state, and any of his likely successors in an election next year, I think, are also unlikely to deliver that progress. So when people say the Saudis are going to normalize soon, that this is back on the table, I mean, the only way that you can believe that is if you essentially disregard the very clear, very public position that the Saudis have taken for more than a year now. And I wouldn't do that. I would take them at their word on it. I think what we're more likely to see are limited peace agreements, a Syrian-Israeli deal to demarcate the border, to a sort of a non-aggression pact on both sides. I think that is certainly plausible. I think a deal between Israel and Lebanon is not impossible. Again, a sort of narrow peace agreement, not broad normalization where you have a bus between Beirut and Haifa. That's not going to happen. But I think a more limited peace agreement is going to happen. And then perhaps some countries outside of the Arab world might be willing to normalize at this point. But when it comes to the core of the Abraham Accords, to Arab countries normalizing with Israel, I think after what happened the last 2 years, that is going to have to wait for some kind of a real diplomatic process with the Palestinians.
Yes, and the Syrian leadership itself said that we are working to make a deal that is limited to security and border and so on. Normalization is something else, something we might say in the future. Yeah. We don't know, actually. Thank you very much, Greg, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.